Aw, yeah. What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and I'm here.
Oh.
I was setting up so I get to say the Bo Daddy, okay? This is Tripp, and I am here with the one and the only Bo Daddy.
Tripp,
Yeah.
It is a delight to see your beautiful face with the East Coast sunshine illuminating your room.
Well, you know, it's 9 o'clock here.
And it's not 9 here.
No. When you're like, I can do 9, I just thought to myself, what is Bo doing using an alarm clock when he doesn't have to get everyone ready for school? But then I remembered you're the problem JD Vance is talking about.
I am that problem.
You don't have kids. I should get 5 votes. I should get mine, obviously my wife's, and my 3 kids vote. And
no.
And you should get what do you say? Like a fraction of a vote. I don't want to give numbers. I might give the wrong one, you know? But I'm just saying, like, when it goes to freedom, liberty, and what Jesus wanted, and controlling the world's largest nation state with the biggest military of all time, Jesus said, you got to be a married dude. Like, he obviously, like, you got to walk in the way of the Lord, right? Married. And democracy. So I just wanted you to know I felt bad for you that someone just had to put it all out on Front Street, Bo. You know?
Dude, can I just say how much I appreciate you bringing this up so that it doesn't look like I'm initiating the conversation because my feelings are hurt and I'm being defensive. It really helps when your friends bring up the issue, and that way you're just responding, conversationally to something that's in the ether and that everyone's talking about. Can I be honest with you, dude?
Yes.
So, I've been off the internet for a long time because of various things, and then my dad passed and blah, 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 blah. I haven't made any videos in a long time. 2 weeks ago, I make a video because I'm preaching through the Gospel of Mark, and we're up to Jesus's doom and gloom in chapter 13. And I just talked about, how this isn't the end of the world.
But that's after he talked to his 4 kids that he voted for.
That's true. Excellent point. And
just think of how many votes Father Abraham would get. Have you thought about that? Man, he would be Father Abrahaming dance in that voting booth all day long.
I grew up outside Chicago, and the saying there was vote early and vote often. But that's a different controversy. So then that silly video about how this isn't the end of the world I stopped that weekend. It got 2.2 thousand views, which if you go from not making videos in a long time to making one and it gets that many and so many responses, I don't know who posted it somewhere, but the evangelicals got a hold of it.
Well, and you were singing. Come on, Bo. You were singing.
Oh, that's right. You texted me. Yeah. I forgot about the Larry Norman thing. And that's what really put it over the top, I think. But then I hear JD Vance, if somebody finds this clip, they play it. And I just felt like, he's a straight white guy. I'm a straight white guy. And so I thought, I'm just going to put out a pastoral response so that I have so many people in my life, single, married, divorced, empty nesters, right? Retired folks who I know are going to be hurt by comments like that. And so I thought, I'll give a pastoral response to give a different perspective. I had no idea. I really wasn't going for clickbait at that point. I would now, but at that point, I really did just want to respond so that people could hear that however you are, whatever stage of life you find yourself, whatever your social location and your history has been, especially with this issue, which is so close to identity and belonging and right value. But I didn't know that everyone was going to start talking about this thing. And then it took off. And so then I thought of something I wish I had said in the first video. So I made a second video. And that all of this just got a huge response, mostly negative. People disagree with me and stick up for the comments. But the interesting part is I actually want to make a third video, but I have been resisting because I don't want to appear to be like chasing clicks. Like
So if less people watched them, you'd feel better about it.
that's true. That is absolutely true. But at this point, I can't go back to that well one more time, or it'll look like I'm, begging the question, if you will.
Well, what if you just told me what you were thinking of saying? Because now that you've preached through Mark, Jesus hangs out with his family, who he gets along with really good in Mark, obviously, and especially his children. And,
So here's the thing. I mentioned it in the second video. Jesus never has anything nice to say about the nuclear family. Never once. No one can show me. He denies his mom and brothers like that he even belongs. He says, no, my real family is this group who does the will of my father. Like, all that stuff. But the thing I thought of is this celebration of the family. It really, people don't know this phrase, but in the academic circles, we talk about the cult of domesticity. And this, like a really great book is Remembering the Way We Never Were. I think this is what it's called, something like that. And, but there's this whole Leave It to Beaver nostalgic thing that has reified, if you want, the picture of what family is. And I get it. Look, I've studied nationalism. I've studied, sort of the social glue that holds things together. I feel the need to say that definition of family, I don't know that there's two ways around it. It's the opposite of what the New Testament calls family. Because what New Testament calls family is a bunch of disconnected, unwanted, non-prestigious, non-blood related, not familial ties being made into something unique and precious because of their loss of affiliation or their disaffiliation with those traditional ties, and being made into something quite unique that some call the kingdom, the family of God, right? Adopted, the beloved community. And it stands to me in stark contrast between a blood and soil approach to belonging and identity and value. The kingdom is a dream or a poem that is anti and and counter and upside down that very thing that those who think that they have traditional values are defending. So I want to introduce people to the cult of domesticity and the nostalgia trap. Those are the two things that I would, if I made another video, that's what I would make it about.
Well, okay. I'll ask a follow-up on this, which I'm just really glad. Small joke about that has turned into part one of the podcast. You know what? I'm just glad we made a list of a whole lot of podcast topics, because with 1 year we're going to get to them. And but here's it. I think it's actually just because we like talking to each other.
I agree.
Now, on top of the cultural thing, you and CJ are like champion siblings, aunts and uncles. Y'all both are in helping professions. For years you've worked with students and things. I was youth minister 15 years with a detour as a college minister. To me, the thing that kind of becomes really clear when you get invited by a lot of families to be in that inner circle of helping to communicate to this person who found themselves in this one family, in this one community, at this one church, that they're deeply loved as they're coming of age, is how, like, I did not run into lots of families that thought, you know who the top 50 people to do this are just the people related to by blood, right? Like the ones that there are all sorts of different families. You learn how complicated every family is. And so I'm interested in how this nostalgia thing plays when just the kind of contact you get with caring for students and these either in ministry, counseling, and then just getting to see different families as very invested aunts and uncles. Like how few people does it apply to? And who would get super pumped about it? Because I think of families who all know half of their family they wish they were closer to, or relationships are different, and are really grateful, say, that their youth minister or their youth minister's partner is close to their teenager at this time. And then you get Christmas cards forever and blah, 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 blah. None of my experience hasn't been one where there's a lot of people that nostalgia would correlate to their life. It would be like they're championing something they're left out of. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think you're onto something. There is an element to the ideal that you can't shake it. When something is held up as an ideal, even if it's not your experience or your point of reference, either the longing for it or the striving to get it, to create it in your own, say, if you have kids, to create that ideal, or the disappointment and harm of that not being your experience, saying, people talk about, oh, my dad was this way. Well, that my dad wasn't that way, or whatever it is. It's the shadow, the specter of the ideal that sort of haunts us. And so people are willing to, even though their family doesn't look like that, maybe the family, their origin family, the family they grew up in didn't look like that, they still think that's the ideal. And so there's something really powerful about what we hold up and what we put on stage and who we hold as models, right? And celebrate, which is why I wanted to say that when we talk about the family within the context of religious community, it's really important that we recognize that even in Scripture, there are 37 types of families in Scripture, right? Whether they're one husband, two wives, multiple kids, childless people who serve at the temple, right, in their age, so many different configurations, divorced, remarried, adopted. There are like 37 types of families in our Old and New Testament. And so it's important that when we say family, we don't mean one thing. And there's also self-selected families, right? Like chosen relationships that go beyond friendship and become something deeper, where there's both loyalty and sacrifice. Like that's how we should identify family, is who we're loyal to and who we would sacrifice for, not who we share blood with or who we have the same last name as. It's just, it breaks my heart, because I know a lot of people feel, look, I hear from people all the time. I got to find my phone. It's going off.
Oh, Daniel Kirk is texting us.
Oh my goodness. I love Daniel Kirk.
He just wanted to let you know that you're killing it with your emphasis on the redefinition of family in the New Testament, and is requesting said third video. So the good doctor, Daniel Kirk.
That's amazing. Daniel Kirk might be one of the most supportive, loyal people I've ever met. I have grown to treasure him in the last 10 years. I really love that guy.
I agree. I like Daniel Kirk.
And he knows what he's talking about the New Testament, which, I rely on people like that, because I have an idea, and then I'll be like, "Hey, does this hold up under under scrutiny?"
Do you know one of the things that this that I mean, there's the way nostalgia plays out just in relationship to the family or some ideal version of America in the past, or that you see the kind of world that never was, nostalgia for the world that never was, but at least existed on a few sitcoms at some point. And that kind of thing plays out in politics, also plays out in the life of the church. When you think of decision making that happens at denomination level for like the future of denominations, you're like, you kind of wonder if they've thought about like the mainline Protestant denominations, if life expectancy hadn't gone up so much, all of the mainliners, 45 to 50% of their regular attenders are 65 or over, which hasn't been true for the life of any of them. Large numbers of them, the under 18 group is less than 10%. So they just actuarial tables say maybe you should do something different. Maybe this isn't succeeding. And that's not what drives the engine, because so much of the energy, sometimes at individual churches, it's like for the nostalgia of its heyday. At the denominational level, for what we think works at this. And I think you can see it in political parties and there's so many places where I think our inability to imagine a future where we feel comfortable in it and we can see ourselves getting to leads people to invent a place in the past and strive for it at all these different levels. And I find that volume of cultural anxiety of like not having a place to lay your head of sorts, metaphorically, that it can generate these kind of nostalgic or for others revolutionary ideas, right? Where there's some judgment of like the primary thing, is the world as it is really wrong, and we need this thing in the back, or we need to burn it down and go to this thing in the future, both of which have a hard time envisioning what the next step forward is that everyone that's around is included in. Yeah.
Man, that's really, I had not tied, so I had tied it to the American founding, but I had not rounded the corner to think about it, the nostalgia of denominational, the institutional decision-making in a church. But you're bringing this up at a really good time for me, because I watched as a United Methodist, we had a big conference, the big conference I watched on video. And then I just got back from our annual conference in person. And I've had a sense of, what are we going to do about discerning a direction for the future? Because there's this thing I haven't quite been able to name that's sort of ever present. It's like it's both a longing and also an obstacle. And I haven't been able quite to name it, but I am wondering if there's something tied in with this nostalgia emphasis that is holding us back and keeping us from really pushing into what's the future for us, because we carry such a memory and a collective expectation from the past. I wonder if there's something to that. I'll have to do some more thinking on that.
Yeah. And the idea of it kind of like it kind of popped in my head, the connection last night when I was talking with Tom Ord about his heresy trial, which led to learning not about the Methodists, but their, kissing cousins and Nazarenes. And there are two elements of this that I thought, oh, now that is an anxious group. At their last big gathering, they now said they're treating their kind of book of order, like which includes like how Robert's Rules works and stuff like that, as with the same obligatory commitment to it as doctrine, right?
Oh no. We've joked about this for years.
But they did it.
Oh no.
And here's what they ended up doing. And so then Tom had gotten in trouble. Well, he's got in trouble for a number of things, but getting rid of classical doctrine of gods, that was and stuff, that's one thing. But the moment you're trying to tell everyone that if you want to be a part of the holiness tradition, we should grow in holiness and include loving welcome for our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters. So that's the step too far. So they use the now making like our book of practices function as doctrine to go like, now you have conduct unbecoming of a minister and all this kind of thing. And they don't just like remove his standing. They also end his membership in the Church of the Nazarene.
Oh, wow.
Which they had never done for anyone. They'd remove standing like on doctrinal issues for other stuff.
Wow.
Or, had them go into timeout or whatever. But they went straight from like, you're no longer ordained here to you're no longer a member of the church. And so you can't preach, teach, facilitate, can't lead classes, can't do all these type of things. And he's like, well, they'd already told me I couldn't preach. So my wife and I run nursery at our church. And that's technically a class. I don't know if I'm so much of a heretic that I can't change diapers and hold kids during worship, but you see, underneath that is this, we can't actually think theologically about the future, but we know how to Robert Rules this junk. And we know what authority looks like and compliance looks like. There were people in the chat who have recently been ordained, and they said they spent almost the whole time going through it, whether they passed or not, trying to ask questions to get at whether or not they like the queer community or not. Like that was like whether we're going to ordain you aggression. And so now that's his story. And I'm just thinking of it because we talked about it last night. But to me, it's interesting that like when you can't imagine, like, how is God present at work in the world with the challenges we're facing and the things that makes us anxious and such? What do we go, actually, maybe we should hold our doctrines a little lighter. And I don't know. You would think the holiness tradition would be better at this than some of the other denominations, because they tend to be centered on Jesus-centered piety, working out salvation, engagement with the Spirit, not like you have ecclesiastical councils and junk for everyone's going to quote creeds in church and stuff. Well, no. So in lieu of going, we don't have the full answer now, but we're in relationship with the Spirit that'll lead us. Well, let's go ahead and put in bold and underline our church practices, which is fascinating because it's so confident. And then in it, I'm like, this just seems wild, right? Like, he said even the people on his committee, they weren't like academics or someone going, the theology's wrong. They just all just used this connection to go, we already know it's wrong. We can't be challenged because the conclusion's already set. We're just worried what you're doing with it.
Wow.
And that's one example, but I see that kind of stuff. And then you can even see, right, like in the trad movement in Anglicans, the failed attempt of doing it within the United Methodist, of like individuals who, when you can't imagine a different world, we're going to cling to the ideas that emerged in a context in the past and then use them to reify the expression of the church that we treasure, and then belligerently walk into the future. And like the way that wove together, I'd never really thought, ooh, that's weird, right? Like what's going on, until I heard Tom lay out the story in his denomination. Then immediately I start thinking of people who've had similar interactions with congregations or traditions.
Man, this is actually a really interesting conversation, especially because I've been missing my dad a lot lately. And there's something specifically that him and I had been talking about in what turned out to be his final month, but we didn't know that. So I'm at this new place, and one of the things I'm doing is I'm updating some stuff in the sanctuary so that we can utilize the space during our worship gatherings a little different. And one of the things, we don't have a choir anymore. It was a tiny choir. It had become an ensemble. They no longer use the choir loft because they were small enough. They could just be out here on the stage or on the auditorium floor. And so I've been renovating, let's say, the choir loft so that we can use it differently musically, so that on down here on between the pews and the stage, there's an area that I want to use for spiritual practices. And so I've been moving some stuff around, and I had told him my plan, and he told me this really funny story. So my dad was an ordained Free Methodist, which is right next door to the Nazarenes. Okay. It's actually far more like, it's a holiness denomination. It's far more like the Nazarenes that Ord was a part of than it is the United Methodist. So even though it's Free Methodist, it's really Wesleyan holiness. So the Nazarenes and the denomination that I grew up in, Christian Missionary Alliance, also would be part of this holiness denomination, right? But he said, my dad said that when he first started training for ministry and would do either pulpit fill or he would visit different churches. So this is in the 70s and 80s, that in some churches, there were still seats and pews up front, like on the stage or off to the side, where the sanctified would sit. So during the church service, they didn't sit with everyone else out in the pews. If you were sanctified, you actually sat up on the stage or in an elevated position, and you looked out at the congregation. And so we got talking about just like, what kind of change has happened culturally and socially and religiously, where if you were to go to a church now and there were, say, 4 or 5, 6 people, men maybe,
Obviously married ones with children, Bo.
who were always, who were set apart, right? Because they were sanctified. Like, just how foreign and alien of an experience that would be. And then, in my denomination, we were going through the thing about same-sex marriage. In my father's denomination, they were going through the ordination of women, both very controversial, both very tension-filled. But the arguments themselves looked very similar. If you did a find and replace in a Word document, the arguments would look very similar. And my dad really had a heart, because his degree was actually in church history. He was actually a historian. It's not what he did professionally, but because he ran the D-Min and he taught like homiletics classes and preaching and leadership, that ended up becoming his vocation. But his real passion was church history. And so he would talk about how we need to reclaim social holiness, a concept of social holiness, instead of personal piety, instead of individual sanctification, a social concept of holiness where we together in our practice of community and connection practice an expectation of holy living that's not based on individualism and personal piety. And I really wish, that him and I had been able to press into that, because he would have brought the historical perspective, and I think I could have brought the more social research style. And I think we could have come up with something that would have been maybe really useful as a proposal of a different way to conduct ourselves, whether institutionally or congregationally. But this concept of social holiness is completely absent from most people's just frame of reference. They don't even know it's an option for an understanding of holiness.
And that's probably pretty similar to what I don't know if you've read it. It was one of Tom's earlier books called Relational Wholeness, which is very similar.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful depiction. I told him it was, I don't run around as a free agent, except the Baptists worked real hard to make sure I never got to work there. And I was like, it was the best case for
I always love when you say that your baptism is your ordination. That's my favorite thing you say.
Well, it's just biblical. It's actually more biblical than the nuclear family, and and your identity as a Christian being tied to your offspring. Except for the offspring in the spirit, Bo.
Yeah,
Come on.
baby.
Anyway, but the one of the things that I think you see in like a more relational or dynamic picture of holiness is that then holiness has to do with the actual character of the relations between each other.
Yes.
And it's the
Yes.
character of the community, the love that abides between the people, which
Preach.
Abiding love, that's tends to be, at least in the Western church, the job of the Holy Ghost. That's what it's been doing for all eternity between the eternally generated Son and the Father. And so, like, why would you not think that relationality is at the heart of participating in the divine life, becoming perfect or all that? Because the perfect love of the Father into the Son, eternally generated, is bound by the Spirit of love. That's just basic Augustine. Come on. And you can see how that shapes for a different version of holiness, because then like that hard binary of like pure and impure, that only works if you're talking about substances, where now the thing that makes you pure or not's this thing.
Yeah.
So maybe the thing is a person. Oh, we can't have them in. We got to cut them out. It's impure.
Yeah.
Or like, how far is too far? That's really important. Or do you have you reproduced yet? Where you have these lists, but the moment the actual love between the community, be it within the divine life, within your own family, within your church community, within your nation, maybe democracy, like the moment you ask the question of purity and it's not a substance-based thinking, but a relational one, then that dichotomy of pure, impure just doesn't work. Because relations, unless they're eternally the divine life, are going to always include things that are more or less committed to the well-being, more or less set for flourishing, more or less recognizing the dignity of the other. Like it is in the very nature of God to have done that for all creation. And if Paul's right, it's not till all things have been subject to the Son, sin, law, and death, that we all get that participate in it, right? It's like the Son becomes subject to the Father so that God's all in all. At that point, then a good pure, impure binary might work. But until then, till God's all in all, it's going to be a mixed bag. In fact, you could talk about wheat and tares, or what, there's just so many things in Scripture. The moment you take a relational framing, the moment the community is the point, not a destination or an individual, then the complexities of it show up, but you don't have to fear them because they come in the very context of grace. It can be complicated and messy because the love that's abiding in it is one in the context of grace. The hope that meets it is for a future participation in the divine life that we've not yet got to.
You are nerding out, and I'm about to take my geek out. So,
well then,
listen. Listen. When you don't have a relational understanding of either the things Jesus says or the teachings of the New Testament or the early churches, when you do anything other than relational understanding, here's how things tend to go. When I hear somebody use either substance language, right, about like the particles, the matter, the material, or they talk about the essence, that something is essentially, let's say, feminine or essentially Christian, or right. I know that once substance or essence is invoked, that things are about to turn away from a New Testament understanding, right, in a relational framework. And they're either going to turn towards Plato, that there's some ideal, to bring it full circle, right, with the romanticization of the ideal. There's some ideal, and then we're dealing with fallen forms, right? But the ideal is unchanged. Or it's about to become nostalgic for some imagined, romanticized past. So,
which functions the same way in the sense of, as opposed to an eternal form, it's a historical form that is more or less a myth.
So when you're dealing, so for me, relational is always my first and primary priority, right? That's my understanding of this entire enterprise, right? Of existence and spirituality. It's relational based. But the minute either substance or essence is involved, I know we're either about to turn towards Plato or we're going to turn towards a romanticized past.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what else people are very nostalgic about, Tripp? Their conceptions of God.
Oh, I was going to say, they're nostalgic about live podcasts that we do together, and they could come to Theology Beer Camp.
When is that?
October
October
17th to 19th.
17th to 19th.
They could use the code Theology Nerd Throwdown 24 and get a discount off their ticket.
Oh,
and
are there still tickets?
Yeah, because we got a place that'll hold. I mean, I think we've sold almost 500, and there's 600 tickets. So
Holy guacamole, that's amazing.
it's going to be a lot. And so the number of people that have said, I can't wait, to see just how Bo puts a whole beer down before you go and get this second.
By the way, I've been practicing with water. This is true. I'm gonna have to limber up a little bit. I do not have the same level of flexibility in my gullet that I used to.
It's kind of like, how when like the older you get, you only got so many days a year you can bring it, and it goes down. This past month I was traveling a lot. The first stop, we stopped in Montana, where we hung out with my old neighbor Joe.
Yeah, Joe.
And so we had a whole bunch of fun. He's a writer for Tosh.0 then, and our family are all close and stuff. And we're going out the first night, and we're all at dinner, and Michelle, his wife, is like, you and Joe are both lost a lot of weight since y'all were neighbors.
You were bad influence on each other.
And I was like, I don't think I'm too old to do that anymore. But I can come out of retirement once or twice a year. I do once at beer camp.
Okay.
And I was like, but I could do it tonight. And then we just fell asleep watching TV.
So yeah, that sounds right. That checks out. Hey, at beer camp, you got some God pods coming.
Oh yeah. Like Theology Nerd Throwdown, which is, it might be I guess we started in January 2016 was the first Theology Beer Camp, but this would be the first one with a TNT episode. So I'm just saying
it's going to be really fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. But Bible for Normal People, Rev Covery, Systematic Geekology, The New Evangelicals, Tiny Revolution, You Have Permission, Crackers and Grape Juice, Tolkien Head Theology on the Rocks, Rethinking Faith, Across the Bifrost, People's Theology, Madong, Emerged, Whole Church, Religion and Justice, Spirituality Adventures, Jonathan Foster's podcast, Sacred Council, Tillich Today, Secret Art Podcast, Radical Love Live, Heart in a Heartless World, Brew Theology, Learning How to See, Future Christian, Honoring the Journey, Revolution Gathering Desert Voices, Gravity Commons, The Biggest Table, Pastor and a Philosopher Walk into a Bar, Common Space. Yeah, that's just some of the podcasts that are going to be there, along with
impressive.
Some cool theologians like James McGrath and Pete Enns and Jacob Erickson, Jill Cranshaw, Corey Walker, Brian Zahn, Grace G. Sun Kim, Myron Pinner, Christian Whaley, Adam Clark, Leah Robinson, Catherine Keller, Ilya Dilio, Jorg Rieger, Gary Dorian, Diana Butler Bass, Brian McLaren, and John Tatamino. And there's probably more that I can't remember.
Tripp, I have a special favor to ask.
I knew you wanted to sing karaoke with me.
I did know. I've been practicing karaoke. I've never sang karaoke. I'm terrible at it, but I have been trying to find songs that might fit my bullhorn, foghorn style.
What was that? What was that song that was popular when we were a youth minister that was so annoying of a dance song that then we kept talking about it? And they, it's just, and there's like, the guy has like one or two lines in it, but it was one of those songs that people dance to. And now it's on some playlist my kids have. And every time I hear this song, I think of, Party Rock.
Yeah. Oh, party in the house tonight.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it was so popular to youth ministers, it never left our head without ever
No.
choosing to
It
listen to the song.
it was my ringtone for a while.
There you go. Maybe this is why I associate it with you, because it comes on and I'm like, "Why do I know just this like, this song?" And
That's
I'm
so
like, "I
funny.
associate this with Bo," and
That's why.
turning it off on youth retreats when people wanna play that song. I'm driving, I can put things on the no
Oh my god.
playlist.
Yeah,
Uh, um,
that's so funny. Hey, here's my special favor.
alright.
Grace Jisung Kim wrote the foreword to the book I wrote with Randy Woodley,
Mhm.
Decolonizing Evangelicalism, and because it's gonna be an election year, when we're
It
in
is?
Denver, can
Oh,
I have a conversation with her about 4 years later, the the present situation of decolonizing evangelicalism? Can I have a follow-up conversation with her, 4 years later reflection?
that sounds like fun.
I'm gonna email her and ask.
And, you just remind me, so I put it on the list.
I'll
When
I will
we're done recording, say, "Trip, write it down."
I'm gonna email her, and then I'll email you what she said.
Yeah, yeah, and I can give you the list of everyone coming because you might go, "Oh, it'd be cool to have this person talk
Mm.
to,"
Oh,
where you have, like, 2 or 3 people that have different experiences, like,
nice.
um, I know
Yes.
that's something that Brian Zahn's talked quite a bit about,
Okay.
after, within what kind of he's in the Holiness tradition, right? Brian
I would
Zahn?
think so. I don't know specifically, but I do know that when I've heard him, yes, I believe that's true.
Yeah. But, and there's a whole group of there's a pre-event for clergy, which Tim
Ooh,
Burnett was like, "Is Bo gonna come early so we can
yes,
hang out at that?"
yes.
And, I think he wants to stay in the same place we are,
Oh, I
and I
love
said, "Well, you just have to make sure we go to bed before 1,"
yeah, woof,
because
we used to stay up late, man.
I know. See if we could rent a really small car and see what happens if we all get in it again.
That was
By the way, people
hilarious.
should know Bo and Tim Burnett is 6'7".
Yeah,
Bo, you're like 6'4".
yeah.
So, uh, like, I
We
love going out with them because it's the only time I feel, smaller just by having a picture taken with friends,
yeah.
and,
Hey, Trip, I know in the next episode, we're gonna play a game about gods that need to die, but can I tell you a story about prayer real quick that I wanna hear your
ooh, I like
reflection
your
on?
pivot. Yes.
You like that? I
Uh-huh.
wanna tell you a story about prayer, but I wanna pick your brain because I know you have a processy understanding that I don't. I mean, I'm familiar with process, but not a committed devotee the way you are.
Well,
And so
I'm just witnessing to you.
okay, thank you for doing that. All right, so you wanna hear my story? I've been waiting to pick your brain on this. So when I found out that I was being appointed here, I'd never been here before, and, I prayed. So this is a story about prayer. Because sometimes I feel like it's best to pray without information to see what God's spirit might be able to bring to you that bypasses your filter and interpretation, okay? And so I just kept a list of things that popped in my head, brainstorming ideas, just whatever, inspirations. I just kept a list so that when I was actually on site and present, if any of them resonated or seemed like they had merit, okay? So one of the ideas that had come to me was for this thing about just giving away clothes, just having a community closet as a like a resource. So I get here, I find out that on our first floor we have an everybody eats food uh, program that has taken on a life of its own and is now its own nonprofit with its own director. But it originally was done by the congregation, and it just was so successful it sort of outgrew the congregation and took on a life of its own. And we had a couple other things down there, an after school program for with the refugee center for kids, and a whole bunch of other things. But we had a lot of empty space because this place is basically like essentially it's a city block. It's just a big facility, and it's 3 stories. And but one of the things that I thought of the list that I had originally made that still sort of seemed like a good idea was this closet thing. So when I was moving in and moving things around, I found an old clothes rack, just a metal clothes rack. And then when we were cleaning out one of the closets, and there was an old storage room that I was going to convert into my office, and there was some clothing in there, and it was like old lost and found stuff that nobody claimed. And so I just I took that. There are like 7 or 8 items of clothing, and I moved the iron clothes rack to where the refugee kids come in and where the lunch is. And I just put out these 7 things, and I took a big sticky note, like a poster size sticky note. And with a giant marker, I just wrote free, right? Just a handmade sign. And I just put it up. And that first week, a couple items of clothing disappeared. But what happened is somebody saw it and then came to us and said, "Hey, are you guys interested in like a clothing ministry?" And I said, "Yeah, it's something that I really feel like God's laid on my heart." And so I put out that rack as a prayer. So acting on the way God leads you, the divine lure, if you will, acting on it is itself a prayer. So by putting the rack out there and putting the clothes on there and putting the free sign out, when you are obedient or you act on how you're feeling led, I believe that is also prayer. That prayer isn't just what happens when your eyes are closed or you're driving down the highway, but that the practice of prayer involves obedience. So by putting this thing out, so this person comes to us and says, "Hey, are you interested in like a clothing ministry?" And we said, "We really do. We think it's a need in the community. And it's something like that, we feel like God's laid on our heart." The next day we get a call from a woman in the town north of here. She has 2 trailers full of clothes, and she used to be able to give them away when students weren't meeting at the elementary school in the town north of here. But because of a shooting scare, they had to kick out all outside groups from the public schools in our area. So no outside groups are allowed to use them because they can't secure the facility. So they haven't had a place to do their ministry, and they've been praying for a place. And so they do these pop-up clothing giveaways, and sometimes they'll get 1,000 people who will come, So I said, "Come on down. I want to show you the space." So she comes, we walk around, and I said, "This big room here," it's called the Pine Room, "I would love to see this as a clothing closet, And the next week they moved in, and they brought all these racks and tables and bins. They have 2 enormous storage rooms. They have thousands and thousands of, not items of clothing, bags of clothing that they bring in these trailers. They sort it every Wednesday with their volunteers, and then we give them away on Sundays. And every week that they're here, I'm sort of like mesmerized about how prayer works. Because this is my interpretation. I believe that this was a divine dream, that this was an idea in the mind of God. And that because they were praying, that God's Spirit maybe prompted me with an idea that then I acted on. And I really think that just putting out that little iron rack with 7 items of clothing on it, that when you act in prayer, I don't know how the spiritual realm works. So this is why I want to throw it out to you. It's like putting out a help wanted sign, It's like a beacon or sending out a broadcast that when someone else is tuned into the same frequency, they hear the music you're playing and then they come and you dance together. So I know none of that is really processed language except the lure part, which I only threw in for you. But in my non-processy vocabulary, those are the words I used to talk about how prayer and obedience is a practice that involves action. So when they're sorting the clothes, that's a prayer. Because whoever is going to come and get that item of clothing, right? In some realm or energy or frequency that goes out, they are praying for that person in a sense by their act of service. In the practice of sorting the clothes, that is a spiritual practice that meets a real need, a physical, material need. All right. So that's all my clumsy language and metaphors and word pictures about how I think prayer actually works.
Yeah.
Please give me your feedback.
Oh, I think it's a beautiful story, and a great example of it. And here's the best reason why. There are two versions of prayer in the church that like are the archetypes of versions that I kind of roll my eyes at. Um, where the way they describe it, I go, this isn't even when you tell me a story like this, the version you have in your head of what prayer is supposed to be doesn't match. Like one, and this is usually our tribe, where they're like, prayer doesn't change God, it changes you, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
yes, it does change you,
Yeah.
but I mean, it might do something else, right? Like there's not a lot of those stories in the Bible where it was just like, and Joshua was like, I mean, I guess it changes me, like the assumption running through prayer from the very beginning of the Hebrew scriptures is that it is actual engagement with the divine that makes a difference. The prophets are like God's responsiveness to the liturgies of the people trying to engage in this thing. So there's like one version is like it doesn't really do anything, but it helps you.
Yes.
Which this story has that element in it, right? Like of it does make you more attentive to what could are the possibilities around you, but that's not the whole thing.
Right.
And then there's the kind of picture of a completely omnipotent God that's already set up and orchestrated everything, and you're kind of like enjoying the way history plays out. And it's convenient there was prayer there because it might make you feel better about things, but this is already ordered and determined. And the only actor in anything's God. Like once you get to that, you're like, then why are religious people praying? Like it doesn't change God because would be unholy. Yeah. And so to me, this story kind of describes like a real dynamic relationship in which the process vision, like every moment of becoming, all the web of relations and actual entities, happenings of the past flood into this moment, and it shapes the horizon of possibilities. But of all the things that are possible in the next moment, they aren't all equal. They're evaluated by God. Like God knows all the possibilities, and the lure, the call, all that language is about how of the possibilities for your concrete moment, the lure is the invitation to say yes to the most beautiful, zesty, true, loving, just of the actual possibilities. And so to me, there's like a few shifts. Like when I was if I was in a congregation saying this and talking about prayer, I would say prayer isn't about God controlling you or you controlling God. We need prayer that moves from a vision of control to cooperation. And so when communication is at the source, then you both recognize what in the story, that there are possibilities on your horizon that God knows you don't know. And you're going to pray, not knowing the words, but knowing the intention. Like I will show up in this space where I've been called. This is my vocation. I trust those who have been called to orient and locate me and my family to serve this congregation, that congregation's in prayer. I'm praying, knowing that there are things I'm showing up for I can't bring with me, but I can bring a spirit of saying yes to cooperation, right? And so you have these ideas, and then the realities get more and more actual the closer you get to it, but you still have to cooperate. And there were other individuals in this story who too had to cooperate with the possibilities. Now, the constellation of cooperation in community can make actual the desires of God. Now, this one just seems obvious in the sense that Jesus literally said, like, clothe me, right? Like, where you're just like, of all the power rankings of how do you know Jesus is there? If it's you retell the story of my execution with all the peeps, including those that betray me, I'm showing up. When two or three are in deep, honest vulnerability and love, I'll be there. When you care for the least of these, and specifically, people without clothes, stuck in prison unjustly, just go through the list of Jesus says. So, like, that there's like the tradition orients you to see those things. So there, the other element of that, so there's a shift from control to cooperation, which means other parts of creation and God are cooperating. Then there's a shift of seeing prayer as about, some people see it as about discovering God's eternal plan, or is it coming to see God's purpose in any moment? Because God's purpose changes in Scripture based on who's responding and not responding, right? Like Jeremiah goes to the potter and it's like, look, you see this pot. If it just did basic pot duties, like respond to the potter's hand, like, you just need to have this element of trust, because then the clay and the potter cooperate and make this beautiful piece of art. But see, if it doesn't cooperate and keeps falling over and then it gets tossed out. And so, Jeremiah, tell the people, I don't have one set plan. I don't know what they're going to do. They're not cooperating right now. But if they move to cooperation, then my plan changes, because I actually just have a purpose for you. Like, I have a deep value for you, but how we cooperate changes what can happen, right? And so that shift from thinking of prayer as, how do I discover God's one purpose for my life and the secret plan for all eternity, right? This kind of language, to prayer as like, how do I cooperate with God's purposing in each moment? Wow. And what is that purposing? Is it's the character of God embodied, imaging the invisible God, participating in the life, those kind of things, and all those abstract concepts that we're to participate in, the fruits of the Spirit and things. Those are there, but what they look like matters in the context. And if the world is a participatory and relational one, what it's going to look like multiple steps down the line is going to vary as to how all the creatures in their own agency respond or resist the invitation of God. And so to me, there's a sense that prayer, when you do that, a process vision isn't one where things are determined, but prayer is participating in a way that you're deliberating. You're trying to deliberate the possibilities with God. You're being deliberate about your actions. You're being deliberate about your listening, because you can't know the full context. You're being deliberate about your actions because you're wanting to cooperate. You're wanting to enact, like you said, the dream of God and this kind of thing. And I find that to like avoid where prayer turns into like a laundry list of things you give to God and go like, why didn't you give me what I wanted? And I guess silence is the new answer. And you're like trying to run cover, because in your head, God was the loving parent that gave you a rock instead of bread. But a process relational view is one where like God meets every creature moment to moment and loves that creature and invites it into the next step of mutual flourishing with the divine life and with its neighbors, human and non. And the measure of cooperation any person or any entity has to do with the way they inherit the past. How are they open to understanding themselves, their context, their all that kind of stuff, and then what kind of limits are there, and then what are the possibilities before it? And so prayer, like if you think of like the prayer without ceasing, involves that kind of cooperative, purposive, deliberative living. It's just that whole flow, you are kind of enacting the awareness of living in the Spirit through kind of the intentional practice of prayer. And one of the things you described right at the beginning is you said, I was praying, but without any specific direction and seeing what came up. And some people would say, well, Well, why would you do that, Bo? Like, you got to pray your heart's desires or whatever. But
Okay.
in some way, you were praying your heart's desires. Your desire was to be a faithful disciple.
Yeah.
And what that looked like at a place where you didn't even know the people in the community yet,
Mm.
you didn't know, but you were already starting to open yourself to cooperate with the divine invitation that you knew would be there. So that kind of, I don't know what I'm praying for,
Mhm.
but I want to be oriented towards prayer for this community that I'm going to serve.
Mhm.
Is it's like you're cultivating a habit
Yeah.
of responsiveness.
We
Like if you
we call
think
it
of,
a discipline.
yeah, if you think of like a pizza slice where it goes like this, and like that whole narrowing of all things are flooding into each moment of becoming. And then there's the agent's decision, and out of it, there's a whole list of possibilities coming.
Okay.
And so the past and the possible come, and then what happens is the way we respond to the invitation of the divine, the shaping of the past. And I think you're right to go there are things we don't know, because like of our whole past coming in, we're only aware of some of it. We aren't even aware of our own story, let alone all the cosmos that we're interconnected with. And when it goes to the possibilities on the horizon, scripture's full of things where what I thought was for X was really for Y, or what was intended for this turned out to be this. And it's not because God was duplicitous. It's just that God is always doing all God can do for flourishing and love and justice, and then is stuck working with agents who have the gift of freedom that's required for loving relations. And so that requires a deep fidelity, patience in God. And so every moment that history of God in the world comes in and possibilities are being met, and then the way we respond or cooperate or make material the divine lure is like how God becomes actual in the world each moment. And prayer, I think, is the discipline of attending to the gift of God's self moment to moment.
That is really helpful. And let me tell you what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to go back and listen to what you said and try and glean some of that. Because here's the project I'm working on. This thing that's happened here has actually changed or given me a desire to partner in ministry going forward. So this is a unique situation for me. You know, I turned 50 last year. I'm 51 now. I'm in a new context in Southern Idaho for the first time. This is the largest building I've ever been appointed to, with the smallest congregation I've ever been appointed to. We don't have the sheer momentum, the manpower, if you will, the energy to do everything, right? And this is something I think that God's been laying on my heart, is in the same way that we have moved to talking about the great commission. So instead of saying commission, like we're commissioned to go and we go and do it and then come back and say, we did it. We did it. It's a commission, because ultimately it's God's work. And God's Spirit is faithful in that mission. It's a commission. In the same way, so here's my theory. I think we need to take the M out of compassion ministries and make them co-passion ministries. So if it's something you're passionate about, you got to find someone in the community who's also passionate about that and partner together. One of the great things about me being handcuffed here in the ways that I am, let's say the limitations, is that I'm having to innovate how we initiate ministries. Because in every context I've ever been in, I've had young people and energetic people and resources. And we come up with an idea and we fund it and we recruit and we train and we empower and we release.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen here. But in order to see the same powerful ministries happen in this enormous complex, this facility we have, we're going to have to partner with people of passion. So instead of saying the Great Commission, we say, or the Great Commission, we say the Great Commission, because God's with us in it, partnering. I want to move to a model of ministry that is not compassion, ministries of compassion, where we're doing good for other people who are in need. But I want to take the M out and make it co-passion ministries, where we as the church have a heart for something and we find partners in the community who are passionate about that. So like in this case, we had an empty room. They had a trailer full of clothes. It's a co-passion.
Yeah.
We can't do it without each other. Right?
You're really good at coming up with words too, but yours makes sense. Like process people, because Whitehead was just like, let's just invent a completely different word and require 200 pages to even understand what the word means. And you're just like, so take compassion, right? We're into that. But then what if you did it in a cooperative way, a cooperative way? Cut them co-passion. So the church has a passion for connecting with the mission of God in the world. And then it has neighbors that are all about that passion. And so then you do the co-passion. You're like, oh, I got that. But then if you were just like physical prehension.
Well, this has been very
Superjet
energizing. I am really inspired. Thank you for it's really fun to brainstorm with somebody who comes from a slightly different perspective than you do, has different experience, and to compare notes. And there's something really energizing and helpful about that.
Well, Bo, I want you to know, given how many times we've talked about all of this, at some point, we're only going to be so different, Like, I could tell you knew basically the kind of riff I was going to give, and you had your material here. You were like, I'm going to let him do his thing, and then I'm going to do the part that clergy are going to steal. I'm going to give the great co-mission and ministries of co-passion. And like you were like, Tripp, could you get runners in scoring position?
Yes. I think, because I think this thing has some merit. I think it has traction.
And it like changes things everyone knows they're into, and it like easily asks lay people to like morph their imagination but not change it, right? Like we are always about doing ministries of compassion, the Great Commission, but then it goes, there's like the actual reality for a growing number of churches of less labor. Volunteers are older and there's fewer of them. The younger the generation is, the longer they work, all that kind of stuff. Money, the number of staff for all that kind of stuff is there. You have like a lot of space that's not being utilized. But when it goes to the church's like desire to practice their faith and do things, it's not gone away. So it's like, what do you do with that? And then it's like, well, what are these places? When I was when I got shifted to being in charge of the group at neighborhood that used our endowment and all that kind of stuff, it was very similar to your Westwood situation. I believe we were among the few churches in Los Angeles that's Oregon's had their own endowment.
Yeah, the Oregon line item on our budget was larger than my salary.
Yeah. Well, when that engineer from Germany has to come tune the pipes, it is what it is. That's just how, that's right in Mark 16. That's what Jesus was talking about after he told everyone the name of his children. Well, at least the male ones. But it was interesting, right? As you first at a congregation, it's like first having can we just keep handing out checks like we've always done? And then now we have to be more deliberate in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
The shift that happened in the group was one where I had made the suggestion, let's give to things that people in our congregation are already excited about in our neighborhood, and they're volunteering, because we had increasing number of, as the boomers retired, you have they're healthy, gifted, and bored, and they volunteer and do stuff in the community. And I said, so let's recruit everyone to tell us where they're volunteering, do a survey and then say are there needs at the places you're volunteering,
Okay.
and then ask them to come present. And so we did this initially as a shift where we did like kind of a blank slate of the giving budget and gave to places where we had members that were already volunteering. Say
Okay.
like the Veterans Homeless Initiative, Interfaith, the Interfaith Food and Family Shelter, domestic abuse places that congregants volunteered. Then we used them to tell their story of service when we featured the different nonprofits that we were there.
All right.
And let that person not only tell like we're giving this money, but give an invitation. So we timed the story to a time people could show up and volunteer once, right? And so over it, like the goal, which I have no idea exactly how it played out after I left, but the goal was that we started doing something similar. I should have asked you for branding, because co-passions, that's magic. But where when we gave, it wasn't something we keep lowering to keep all the stuff for ourselves, right? Like the external side of your budget and the internal. The temptation at a church is to keep all the internal money the same and shrink what you give. And as clergy and the leadership of the church, they're like, we don't want that to happen. We have to do with less if we're going to not give as much. So make the stories of people serving featured, and then ask them to start participating more, so that those budget items aren't just like, well, we could give less and still have 7 ministers, 14 part-time people for half as many people, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like we can't not give there, because we actually know our friends who are retired and served there. Other people have gone and volunteered there recently. And then you tell the story of what happens when you show up there, and we ordain them, in the service. We're sending you out as members of our church, not just a volunteer, but you go with our blessing and our support. And it created this dynamism where you now feel a little different when you're looking at the budget, and you just go, do we really need to send 15% of our budget out to nonprofits every year? Let's shrink it down to 10. Let's do it to 5. Well, it's a hard time. Let's do it to 1. I wanted to, like, the moment you have those like co-passion type framing, and it's connected to these kind of like that co-mission framing, like that, like you don't think your identity is something other than where you're partnering with people on the outside. And I think that normal mainline kind of thinking of mission is the things that are really our mission have our name on it. But this isn't our name, it's our people in it. And that is like, I think, a really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm pumped about this, Bo. I like it.
Yeah, me too. There are really good groups doing good in the world under non-religious banners.
Yeah. It would be like if every moment, even if you don't use the word God, the invitation to participate in the divine life is available. Like you just happen to bear the dignity of the image of God. Like even someone you could say was an enemy of God. Is it you were like, well, is this an enemy of God? No. It's the very object of the divine embrace. And so every moment people have the invitation to cooperate intentionally.
Can I bring this back to holiness for a second? I just had 2 ideas.
Come on, Holy Ghost.
Touch each other. In the same way that we have moved into a Jesus-y understanding that there are no sacred places. Like the sanctuary is no more sacred than the park across the street. Because in Christ's name, it's all sacred, right? There's no holy places and non-holy places. In God's world, there are only holy places, right? And there's not just one day of the week that's holy, right? One day of the week that's every day is holy, right? Every day is the Lord's day. In that same way, we could move to saying it's not just organizations that have a cross in their logo or a Christian, banner, because you are an image bearer, right? At the Imago Dei, and you carry God's Spirit, the presence, the divine presence with you wherever you go. Anywhere we volunteer, anywhere we serve, anywhere we give, in the same way, God's presence is there. It's not holy and unholy, sacred and secular. It would be easy to build that same bridge to an understanding of organizations and institutions and nonprofits. They don't have to be Christian by name if the intention is there and the spirit is there. In that same way, we don't need to categorize them as religious organizations and non-religious organizations.
Yeah. Well, I'm tempted to keep talking, but
I know we got to wrap up. Hey, what are we going to call this episode? You're really good at titles. What are you leaning towards?
I feel like there should be a joke about parenting,
right?
And what about co-parenting, but with a slash through something, or maybe co/parenting. And
we need Pete Rollins with his parentheses. I don't know what to put the parentheses around. I don't know what to bracket.
Dude, you know what's funny is Caputo's newest book.
Yes.
When he uses God and it's in reference to like the ontological God, it's in Gothic font. And I'm just like, all the postmodern philosophy types keep coming up with new cool ways of playing with God, right? Like you get a dash for the O, put it under, like strike through, like you start going through this and then I'm like, you just went straight Gothic font in all caps. That's pretty cool. David Ray Griffin did Gawd, like GAWD.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about it. And I feel left out. Like that's what we should work on, is coming up with on TNT when we make reference to Sky Daddy. We could get a sound effect.
Okay.
That's what we do. If we find a cool sound effect, I'll hit it. Like where if you were just like, I don't want none of that Sky Daddy. Or what, like we'll see what we got over here, but I could download some more.
Can we get like an angelic choir?
Like, where's that Sky Daddy at?
That was very new agey though.
Yeah.
But I get what you're going for.
I love that Onto God.
So in the same way that the continental philosophers, they went through a linguistic turn, and now Caputo has done a font version of that. We need an audiological turn.
Yeah. Or maybe we what if we got a friend to do a little voiceover, and then we just have their little voice thing where it's like it's ontological God, but then someone's just like, call me daddy.
What if we had somebody with a thick Southern accent and a deep voice, and they did something about this is the Lord, but it was like,
but underneath this is the Lord.
Because you have to, when you say Lord, you need somebody with a distinct.
Yeah, if you're getting regional to the turning point in the sermon, like before they obviously bring the Lord in their heart, then you get Lord, and then at the end when you're just bringing it home, then it's loud like that. Like you
little gospel.
That's one of the perks of Southern preaching, is since we have very, very polyamorous relationship with our vowels. What vowel you use, how long it is, like it's just a place of inflection. We're like Pokemon, you only got your name, but you can use that name in all sorts of ways. You're like Pikachu. We're like that with Lord. And
wow.
You could have a whole soundboard of different ways of saying Lord.
I bet. Oh boy. Well, we need to wrap this up because I I haven't had coffee yet. I got to go get some coffee.
All right. All righty. Well, those of you that have hung out online,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you soon.